Hi, gang.
Oh, it's you.
Welcome to your Lesson 11 podcast. And we're going to be talking about political developments in the early republic. Your guiding question is: how did the Federalists and the Republican visions for the United States differ?
All right, as usual, you guys, there also are some vocabulary terms. The vocabulary for this lesson is loose construction, nullify, sedition, states doctrine, strict construction, Washington's farewell address, and the Whiskey Rebellion.
Okay, guys, and we're going to start with the introduction. So, just to kind of talk about where we've been, after the American Revolution, leaders worked to guide the government formed under the Constitution. Look at the illustration. So, you guys are actually going to have to open your books on page 204. Okay. And you're going to see four important leaders in the government. So, the one on the far right stands George Washington, right? And he's been lured out of retirement to serve as the nation's first president, reluctantly.
Reluctantly, yep.
Yeah. Seldom has a leader seemed more reluctant to take power. My movements to the chair of government, he wrote on leaving home, will be accompanied by feelings not unlike those of a culprit who is going to the place of his execution.
Oh my God. Doesn't sound like he was very excited about being the first president. All right, Henry Knox sits opposite Washington. During the American Revolution, Henry Knox, a bookseller in Boston, became a general and Washington's close friend and advisor. When Washington became president in 1789, he made Knox his Secretary of War.
Okay. Two more important leaders in the early government were Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. Hamilton, who stands beside the president, served as Washington's Secretary of the Treasury. Jefferson, who stands behind Knox, served as Secretary of State. He managed relations between the United States and other countries.
Washington chose Hamilton and Jefferson for these positions because of all they had in common. Both were patriots who had served their country during the war. Both also had brilliant minds.
However, for all that they had in common, the two men were opposites in many ways. Hamilton dressed with great care, while Jefferson was sloppy with clothes. Hamilton was a doer who moved from task to task, but Jefferson was a thinker who took time to explore ideas.
All right, as you will discover, Hamilton and Jefferson soon became political rivals. Their conflicting visions about the role of government eventually gave rise to the nation's first political parties and continue to influence America today.
All right, guys. And with that, we're going to start talking about the launching of this new government. So on April 30th, 1789, George Washington took the oath of office as the first president of the United States.
All right. So it was a bit of a debate over what George Washington's title ought to be. All right. Vice President John Adams pointed out that the European heads of government had titles like Your Excellency that showed respect for their office. The president, he argued, should have a similar title. Supporters of strong national government agreed.
Others argued that such titles smelled of royalty and had no place in a democracy. The debate finally ended when Washington let it be known that he preferred the simple title, Mr. President.
All right, now we're going to talk about the setting up the executive branch. Remember, we've got three branches of government. This is all about the executive. Next, Congress turned to the task of creating executive departments. As Washington had feared, arguments broke out at once over what those departments should be and what powers they should have.
Congress eventually approved three departments. The Department of State was set up to handle relations with other countries. The Department of War was established to defend the nation. The Treasury Department was set up to oversee the nation's finances. Congress also created an attorney general to serve as the president's legal advisor and a postmaster general to head the postal system.
Okay. All right, you guys, Washington as president. The most critical problem facing the new government was that the national treasury was empty and the nation had no money. Congress had the power to raise funds through taxes, but its members argued endlessly about what to tax and by how much. In 1791, Congress finally agreed to place an excise tax or a tax on the production or sale of a product on whiskey and other luxury goods, such as carriages.
Okay, well, this tax on whiskey caused quite a rebellion.
Yes.
So settlers living west of the Appalachian Mountains reacted angrily to the tax. because Western farmers found it too costly to transport their grain across the mountains to sell in eastern cities. So they distilled their bulky wheat into whiskey, which could be shipped more cheaply. Many farmers complained that the tax made their whiskey too expensive, so they refused to pay it.
All right. Alexander Hamilton and George Washington saw the Whiskey Rebellion as a threat to the authority of the national government. At Hamilton's urging, Washington led 13,000 state militia troops across the mountains to crush the rebels. Faced with overwhelming force, the rebellion ended. You guys get that? He's the president of the United States, leading 13,000 militia, all right, over the mountains to go put down this rebellion.
So just imagine Biden, like
on horseback, leading soldiers into battle.
Yeah. Different time.
Yes, different
but
times.
It made a huge statement.
Oh my gosh, did it ever? Absolutely.
And it squashed the rebellion. Okay. Another issue during his presidency was the French Revolution. And in 1789, the French people rebelled against their king. And Americans became caught up in the debate over the events in France. The leaders of the French Revolution dreamed of building a nation based on liberty, equality, and fraternity. Fraternity is brotherhood. 3 years later, France became a republic and declared a war of all peoples against all kings.
Many Americans were thrilled by the French Revolution. This was especially true of Jefferson and his followers, who began calling themselves Democratic Republicans, or simply Republicans. The Republicans saw the French Revolution as part of a great crusade for democracy.
Yeah. In time, though, news from France caused supporters of the revolution to change their opinion. France's revolution,
revolutionary government.
Thank you. I'm missing my spot here. France's revolutionary government began beheading wealthy nobles, resulting in some 20,000 men, women, and children being killed.
That's a whole lot of people. Hamilton and his followers, who called themselves Federalists, were appalled by the bloodshed.
Yeah. And we'll be talking more about this.
It was a massive conflict in George Washington's cabinet over what side are we going to take?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Now, this seems premature, but we're going to start talking about Washington's farewell address. So near the end of his second term, he served 2 terms. Washington announced that he would not run again. Okay. Before leaving office, the president prepared a message that became known as Washington's farewell address, in which he reminded Americans of all that bound them together as a people.
Next, Washington warned of 2 threats to the nation's future. One of those threats was problems the nation was having with other countries, and the other threat was the spirit of party. Washington said that it was natural for people to hold different opinions, but he warned against the dangers of passionate loyalty to parties. If fighting between parties was not controlled, it could tear the young nation apart.
Yeah. And guys, that's the end. We're going to do a little review here. Hold on while I get to our review. And just as a review from what you've heard, this new government under Washington, right? George Washington took office as the president in 1789. In 1794, he ended the Whiskey Rebellion, which was a farmers' protest against taxes. And we're going to stop there and learn more about Hamilton and Jefferson in our next podcast.
All right, you guys, mission accomplished.
Okay, thanks.